welcome to the world-famous and award-winning Driving You Crazy podcast. This is the show where we talk about all things transportation, anything that gets you from here to there. I am the traffic anchor and the transportation reporter for Denver 7 News, Jason Looper. If you would like to contact me, all of my contact information is in the description of this show, or you can just Google me, and there's way too much information about me on the wide open internet. Recently, one of our anchors, Nicole Brady, one of our co-anchors in our morning show here on Denver 7, well, she spoke to one of our local trucking companies. She was hooked up for a story. The trucking company is JFW Trucking, and they were talking about road safety. Well, as part of her story, she mentioned at the end of her story that there is a group of drivers with JFW that have their own podcast. They call it the Channel 23 podcast. And I've talked a lot in the past on this show, mostly to long-haul truck drivers, about some of the issues that they face. And I thought the story that Nicole did was a really good opportunity to talk trucking again, but this time on the local level instead of the over-the-road long-haul level. So I invited JR Saenz, and JR is the safety director at JFW Trucking. They're up in Commerce City, Colorado, up just on the north side of Denver. And he's also a co-host of the Channel 23 podcast with Jim and Dave. And I asked him to be here on the show. JR, thanks so much for being here on the world-famous Driving You Crazy podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So when you were a kid, I'm sure you used to play with trucks, just like I did. But did you ever think that is what you were going to do for a career? How'd you get into trucking, and what was your first day like behind the wheel?
To answer the first part of that question, Jason, absolutely not. I never thought of actually that I was going to be a truck driver as I grew up. And just like you mentioned, though, I did play with a lot of trucks and cars and things like that as I was growing up as a kid. And it just kind of fell into my lap. I think my father was the one that kind of started getting into it later on in his career. And I essentially started opening up to it a little bit more, and other family members were already kind of in it. And that essentially kind of convinced me into it.
And what was that first day like when you got behind the wheel of one of those big trucks?
To be honest with you, I was excited about it only because of what I was already doing in the military. So it kind of gave me a little bit of a feeling of what I was doing. Basically in control of a big vehicle, a big piece of equipment. Having handled aircraft and pushing buttons, flipping switches, things like that. Essentially, getting into a big truck almost reminded me of that. So that was it was an easy transition for me and made me feel a little more excited about it.
I'm sure when you were in the service that you probably didn't do any long haul driving. Did you ever consider that, or only wanted to do local routes?
I did consider all possibilities of trucking. I think that just comes with that industry. However, I feel like I'm very lucky and blessed to have fell into being here locally, especially being part of JFW.
What are some of the differences then when you're driving a local route over, let's say, a regional route or long haul routes? Are there has to be probably some similar issues that all drivers have to deal with, right?
Yeah, of course. We all drivers have to deal with the general public, other cars and just all that stuff that comes with traffic. I believe, I don't have too much over the road hauling experience. I've done a little bit of it. I believe once you're out on the highway, out on the open road, it's a little bit different. It's a little more calm, a little bit more, sightseeing outside the window there and still being aware of your surroundings and all, but being local, it's a whole new realm of things. There's just so much movement, so many things going on, that you have to be almost hyper aware, hypersensitive to everything going on, traffic wise, pedestrians, even animals, animals crossing our paths here in the Great Rocky Mountains. You have elk, deer, and here local, obviously within the cities and residential areas, you have dogs, cats, things like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just like any other regular local driver does. It seems very similar to what just a regular car driver is dealing with on a daily basis.
Of course.
My guest is JR Saenz. He's a safety director at JFW Trucking up in Commerce City, Colorado. He's also co-host of the Channel 23 podcast that you can find on any of the podcast apps. Now JFW drivers, you guys haul all kinds of trailers. You're not just doing the standard 18-wheel rectangular boxes, right? What does that make driving more complicated when you have a flatbed or a unusual type of trailer?
I wouldn't say so much more complicated, Jason, but more that we definitely have to be able to wear different hats. You know, one day we're wearing the hat of being an end dump driver, which is primarily what we do, hauling aggregate, you know, sand, rock, things like that to concrete plants or even other customers, depending on what their use is. But then, you know, the next day we might be doing something along the lines, like you said, we're doing some flatbed work. So now we have to put on the different hat, a different mentality of what we have to do and getting into a routine of, you know, making sure our load is secure. How do we secure it? And maybe even changing our way, our routes, basically, you know?
And speaking of when you're hauling gravel or something like that, some aggregate of some sort, a lot of drivers on their trailers, they will have a sign on the back and it says not responsible for broken windshields. Do you guys actually believe that?
Not necessarily, Jason. I think there's quite a bit of
Yeah.
responsibility behind the driver is who's behind the wheel, you know. We obviously can't be responsible for road debris.
Right.
That's a big one, you know.
Right.
Road debris is everywhere. And we see it all day long, every day here in the city or even out on the open road, whether that be rock, sand, or whatever, or even just foreign objects. Can't be responsible for those things. However, we're responsible for our loads. We got to make sure that we are, you know, making sure our tailgates are locked up and closed up and making sure they're not going to open and pop open on the road. If we're doing flatbed, just like I said earlier, is we got to make sure that our load is strapped down correctly, whether that's using straps or chains or whatever it's necessary to keep for load securement, I should say.
Yeah, that's a question that I've received several times, and I've done some stories on it and talked to lawyers about it, and they say there's really no legal standing behind it, and you can, and the state patrol says if something comes out of a vehicle, whether it is a rock or something like that, then they consider it a crash, and if it comes from the roadway, as you said, if it was already there and then it's kicked up and cracked somebody's windshield, then that's, you know, just an act of driving.
Yeah, it's a really gray area. From my understanding is even if something were to pop out, you know, somehow the wind catches something like, for example, a pebble or something, and
Yeah.
you know, it comes out of the trailer, and as soon as it hits the ground, technically it's considered road debris. You know,
All right.
JFW goes further than that. You know, we do investigations on our end as far as, okay, is our driver loaded, unloaded when this happened? You know, what was the situation? And we have devices such as dash cam, so we can actually see into things like that as to where the driver was driving through, and you know, going off of those facts. And if we do indeed know that it could be a very big possibility that we did something, we own up to it. We step up to it and try to do the right thing.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, and there's just times where there's just not enough evidence. There's just not enough things that happen that sometimes, you know, some claims do have to be denied.
Right. Right. My guest is JR Saenz. He's a safety director at JFW Trucking up there in Commerce City, Colorado. And he's also co host of the Channel 23 podcast. And I was just wondering, what was the spark that started the Channel 23 podcast? 'Cause to me, when I've listened, it actually sounds like a company meeting. Just a couple of the employees, you know, are leading the meeting, and that everybody can attend the meeting while they're driving, rather than sitting in a meeting room wasting time.
Of course, you know, I think our you know, the owners of JFW, Jim and Dave, they've been great people to I would say, you know, motivate their team and to have us come up with ideas how to make the company better and be open to those ideas. And got to give it up to our my coworker Jan Backus, and he's the one that came up with the idea of doing a podcast. And you know, we call it the original podcast episode 1, but he brought myself and another coworker in, and we didn't know what we were going into the room for. He puts the phone down and essentially just says, "Hey, I'm just going to ask you a few questions, just answer naturally, blah blah blah." And it was a good, you know, 7-8 minute what would you call it? I guess test.
Yeah.
A test of a podcast, and we didn't know what it was until after the fact. And once he told us what his idea was, we were on board. We thought that was great. He let Jim and Dave, the owners of JFW, basically listen to it, and it just kind of sparked off from there. Our first couple episodes were I would say, very short. And then essentially just got a little bit longer and longer. Now they average anywhere between an hour and 2 hours long.
Wow. Yeah, and they probably sound a little raw, like my first podcast did, years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, the first couple podcasts, I think we all noticed the evolution of it now, but it was more PG, a little bit more politically correct, I guess you can say, or whatever the case. And then essentially it just became more natural. We just were having a conversation with not just our drivers, even though the podcast is directed towards our team, but to all drivers and the general public as well. They get a little taste of what we do and what we do to be better as drivers.
And that only has to be a good thing, when it regards safety. I know a little bit about CB radios, like Channel 17. I think that's mostly used for truckers, that the over-the-road truckers that are going north and south on highways, and the 19 is supposed to be for east-west highways, and some of the other channels are for individual routes and different places around the country. So why the name the Channel 23 podcast?
So Channel 23 is just it's basically the CB channel we've been running for our company. No channel is owned by anybody, but you usually try to look for a CB channel that's kind of free and clear. And JFW basically chose 23. At least that's from my understanding, and that's where it all comes from. We decided to call the podcast Channel 23 because that's where you'll find a JFW driver on.
Do you know all the CB lingo, all the radio lingo, and use it all the time, even when you're not on the radio?
No, not at all. Unfortunately, I think that's been a lost art, if you will.
Smokey and the Bandit style?
Yeah, we do reference a couple of those things. It's usually more towards, the older generation. But going back to what you mentioned earlier about, over the road drivers, even then, CB use has gone down, unfortunately, and I personally think that's a big safety item. That's something that could prevent crashes and let other drivers know what's going on. But unfortunately, technology has kind of taken over, and everybody's just busy on their phones now, whether that be a phone call or text messaging.
Yeah, it is the most distracting and most deadly device ever created for a vehicle, that's for sure. My guest is JR Saenz. He's the co-host of the Channel 23 podcast, as well as the safety director at JFW Trucking up in Commerce City. I think your overall theme of your podcast is safety. How tough is it to keep talking about safety over and over and over again, but also make it interesting and different for the people who are listening?
Safety in general, I don't think it's tough to talk about safety. I don't think anybody has ever frowned upon, somebody wishing the best for you or training you to be a better version of yourself in what you do and perfecting your craft. I think what's tough is the repetition. We find ourselves in a repetitive cycle of having to go over things that we may have gone over the previous podcast or a couple podcasts ago or whatever. And I think that's the tough part, because sometimes you feel like the message is it's being heard, but nobody's listening to it, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, no, totally. It's like when I keep talking about the zipper merge, how everybody's hearing it, but they're not doing it.
Oh yes, a lot of people get mad about the zipper merge. It's funny you bring that up. I was just in that this morning coming down I-25 in Santa Fe here. But if everybody did it the way it's designed to do it, traffic would actually move a lot quicker. But there's people that get mad if you're passing them on that lane that's closing up just because they're moving all the way up to the cones. And essentially, if you did the zipper move, it would let traffic flow a lot more.
Yeah, but everybody, and you see this every day, everybody is selfish in their car, and they only are thinking about themselves, not the greater traffic good, and so they could flow faster if they were on board, but how dare you cut in front of me?
Everybody's in a hurry, Jason. Everybody's got somewhere to be. That's the mindset.
Yep.
And it's an unfortunate mindset because that's what gets us into trouble, being in a hurry. And we say it on our podcast and to our teammates as well. Being in a hurry, as one of our coworkers, we call him Super Dave. Haste makes waste is his saying,
Yep.
and it's true.
What would you want to tell car drivers, four wheelers as you call them? What would you want them to know about being and driving near a truck?
Oh my gosh, give us our space. That's the big one. Give us our space. It's not just for our safety, it's more for their safety. The space we leave in front of us between ourselves and the car in front of us, that space is there intentionally for just in case of an emergency braking. That's the space we need to safely be able to stop our vehicle and our load. We have to work with momentum a lot. Cars don't have to deal with that so much because they're so much lighter. I'm gonna go ahead and say maybe I don't know, 10 times lighter, maybe a little bit more than what a truck does, a loaded truck does. So they don't have to work with the momentum so much, and a truck driver does. So cutting us off in front of us or anything like that, it's not so much the safety of the truck driver, but it's more that person's safety.
Yeah,
So
because you imagine if you have, let's say, a low, something in your personal car, you have your groceries in the back seat, and when you slam on the brakes, everything goes forward, right?
oh, of course.
And in a truck, when you're carrying 35 or 45 or 50,000 pounds, all of that stuff could shift, and it's pushing the front of the truck, pushing the whole vehicle forward. So that zone that you mentioned, that area, that distance that you're giving in the front of your truck, it isn't a place for people just to cut in front of you just because it's an open space. Now I can cut into that lane.
Of course. And our trailers being end dumps, they're semi-closed trailers, obviously, but they have a bulkhead up front where, it's not letting that load go any further than that, but it is pushing you. It's pushing the tractor itself, just as you mentioned. That's the whole reason why people are encouraged to wear their seatbelts because, in a crash or an emergency stop, the vehicle stops or becomes to a stop. Everything inside of it, if it's not secured, it's going to go out the window.
And I can't imagine how, I guess, nerve-wracking it must be to have somebody in a car cut in front of you and then slam on the brakes because there isn't enough room for them to be where they are. The traffic is slowing down in front of everybody. You left some space for you to stop, and then they cut that space in half, or if not, into just a little bit of a quarter. So I think that also must be a little bit nerve-wracking for the drivers to be on high alert all the time.
Of course, Jason. Yeah. For a professional driver, somebody that takes pride in their job and what they do, it is nerve-wracking because that is a decision somebody makes that can affect not just them, it affects everybody around them, including that truck driver. We have to think about our own lives and our own families and including everybody else's on the road. What we do out there has repercussions that are beyond what anybody else may think of.
My guest is JR Saenz. He's a safety director at JFW Trucking, and he's also the co-host of the Channel 23 podcast that you can find on any podcast app. Just search Channel 23 podcast, and you'll find it. What other issues would you want if you could sit down with a room of 100 just regular drivers? What else would you tell them about being around a truck and how to operate their car safely to make sure that you're operating your truck safely?
I think it comes down to just being considerate. It's not just for truck drivers, but everybody else on the road. We have to be considerate about others. Truck drivers take it to heart as to what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we need to drive out there. I don't think for the normal person that just gets in their regular car to go to their office job or whatever type of job it is and go back home. I don't think they think about this too much, but being considerate of what's going on around them and being considerate of others as well goes a long way as far as safety goes. Phone use, that is a huge one. Phone use is huge. Even at red lights, what's the first thing everybody does is everybody grabs their phone, looks at that message, looks at that video, email, whatever, and how many times do you not have to, whether it's ourselves or somebody else honking at the person in front to get moving because they're not paying attention, and it's unfortunate because it could lead, that's the least, how can I put this? It's not such a big deal, I guess you can say, in that case, but there are other cases where you're not paying attention and there's pedestrians, crossing the street, and because somebody honks at you, or maybe you just happen to see the green light and you start going, you never paid attention that there's somebody in front of you now, and that's potentially hazardous, dangerous to run over somebody or something.
Yeah. One of the issues with trucking is I know it's across the board, whether it's what you do or long haul trucking, but one of the issues is finding people to drive. So there's been a real push to get some younger people to learn to drive, but that inexperience can be dangerous too, right? It would be the same, I think, for nearly every industry. Experience is always safer. So what's your take on having younger drivers versus the need for more drivers?
I can agree with you more, Jason. However, training, I can't say it enough, and experience, um, it's unfortunate. We kind of, it's unfortunate for the situation nationwide, but it's fortunate for us. We've been pretty fortunate and blessed that we have not had a shortage of our drivers, here at our company here. However, we see the trends, and it's unfortunate that we see quantity over quality, unfortunately. And it's not that person's fault, that person that's looking for a new career, new job. It's not necessarily their fault. It's more so, these truck driving schools, which there are really good ones out there, but unfortunately there's some that just want to push out numbers, and they're not doing good by that person that wants to do good.
Yeah, and it's sometimes not the young driver's fault. They need the experience, but then they're put in situations like there was a disastrous crash near Conifer about a month or so back, where a driver without a commercial vehicle license was driving, and then a few years back there was another devastating crash out on the west side of Metro Denver that happened after a truck driver said he lost his brakes coming down Lookout Mountain and then crashed into a group of cars and he killed several people. Is it the same? It's like these younger drivers or inexperienced drivers, especially driving in the Colorado mountains or anywhere in the Rocky Mountain West, has to be a major issue. What's your take on the mountain driving and mountain driving safety?
Oh, mountain driving is super serious. That's something not to be played around with. We're not on flat land here in Colorado, at least not half of Colorado. And we do a lot of trucking in the mountains, and that takes a whole new degree, a whole new level, where we have to raise our bar and be super alert, and perfect our craft at what we do. Really be in tune with our trucks and what they have to do, and anything that basically raises any yellow flag. Maybe you smell hot brakes, or you're seeing smoke or something. You just got to stop right then and there, not even push the situation, um and assess from there. And something great about here at JFW is that we provide our teammates that any type of doubt, any gut feeling, you stop. You stop, you call somebody, you get a second opinion, and we go from there. We will not risk their life or anybody else's life on the road.
How do you,
And
as a driver, go down a steep slope safely? Can you downshift? I've heard issues with some drivers. They say they can't downshift when they're coming down some of these slopes. How do you do it?
so basically, you definitely have to assess what's going on. If I'm loaded with, an 80,000 pound truck and trailer, we have to select the gear. And this is way before we even start coming down the hill. But right when you crest a hill or a mountain, I should say, and you start on that downgrade, you should be in a gear that is going to hold you with the engine brake. And what we mean by that is that the pressure is being produced inside the engine that is stopping, or at least providing some type of resistance to the transmission, the wheels, all that stuff. Um, it is a gear and an engine brake setting that will hold you regardless of that, of what that grade is. And there's also speed limits. There are speed limits for trucks. um Coming down Genesee Hill, that's 45 miles per hour. Obviously it's 40 miles per hour now because of the construction zone. However, it's usually 45, and you should be able to select a gear to hold you at that speed limit, and if not slower. There's nothing wrong with coming down slower as long as you're doing it safer. or safely, I should say. And at the end of the day, you get down the hill, no smoking brakes, no faded brakes, which is important. Unfortunately, that's what happened to the gentleman from a couple of years ago. He could not stop because at that point the brakes were way too hot. And essentially, the goal is to be, the end goal is to get home safely to your families.
What would you do in that kind of a scenario where you have a loaded truck and you're coming down a hill and you are hitting the brakes and they are not working? And for some reason, you're not able to use your gears and downshift like you would in a regular, let's say you're a regular car. And I know I used to have a manual transmission, and you downshift on some slopes so you can start slowing, using the engine to start slowing you down. Well, what would you do if you're in that situation? Would if you were coming down the hill without brakes, would you try to ditch it if you didn't have an emergency truck ramp? Or I mean, what would be going through your mind, and how would you handle that situation?
Yeah, well, you took that option from me. I was going to say the runaway ramp, Jason. That's what they're built for.
Right,
That's what
sure,
they're there for.
sure.
There are telltale signs before you even get into a situation like that. You should, again, this comes back to being fully aware of what you're doing, how you're doing it. And, if I come down the hill and I find myself tapping on those brakes way too many times, that's already a sign that something's going on. I'm okay. Number one, I'm probably not in the correct gear to be coming down in if I'm hitting my brakes that many times. But to answer your question, Jason, if I did find myself in a situation where I had some type of brake fade or something, and this is, unfortunately, it is a personal decision, but for me, I would try to ditch it, put it somewhere where I am not going to hurt anyone except for probably myself. It's a very difficult decision personally for anybody. The human is not made to basically, hurt themselves. But if it means that I'm going to save other lives, for me, I'm going to put it into a ditch, even if it means laying over the truck and trailer, and I may or may not make it.
But you are a unique person. There are a lot of people like that person who crashed several years ago who made a different choice and unfortunately killed a whole bunch of innocent drivers stuck in a traffic jam.
That is true, Jason, and it also comes down to the situation too. I think hypothetically there is a lot of drivers out there that would say the same thing I'm saying until they're in that situation. Things change when the adrenaline is running, and you're not thinking straight, or it's just in the moment. Things could be different, but I think that when you put yourself in that situation, as far as mentally, you're thinking of the what ifs. Once you make that decision mentally doing that, then you know that if it ever does come down to that you will try your best to do what you're, in my case, would be to put it in the ditch.
Right. Is this come down to maybe restricting a driver with very few miles from driving up in the mountains or doing those kind of runs? Should there be maybe more restrictions on how much experience a driver has before they can go up? I can't imagine in the wintertime trying to drive a tanker full of gasoline over Loveland Pass. That has to be the most bottom clinching situation in your entire life.
Of course, I don't think restriction would work. Maybe that's just the unpopular opinion, but it comes down to training, and that means being proficient in what you're training and making sure that driver is taking in everything that they're being trained. It comes down to training and follow-ups, just constant follow-ups for any situation that comes up, and to and continue on coaching, continue coaching, continue training. And eventually that person sees, the importance of why it is we do the things we do and how they're done. And you can have 10 years of experience being behind the wheel of a truck, but if you've never been up the mountain, that 10 years is like nothing. So eventually we all have to have our first time.
Right. My guest is JR Saenz. He's the safety director at JFW Trucking in Commerce City, Colorado. He's also co-host of the Channel 23 podcast that you can hear on any of the podcast apps. Speaking of stopping, I know a lot of the smaller trucks or the tractors that carry local loads for the most part. A lot of folks like to use the engine brakes, and it makes the loud sounds. They call them Jake brakes, and they're quite and they're quite loud, especially for folks who are in neighborhoods or not used to hearing it all the time. What's your take on drivers using Jake brakes and making all that racket?
We got to move on to new technology. That's something JFW has done. We've moved on to newer trucks, and we are long gone are the days of having loud engine brakes. We
Well,
hear them down 270 by our offices, and used to love them. I'm not gonna lie. I personally used to love them a lot. I once in a while the nostalgia kicks in, and I'm like, oh, that sounds great, But it is really nice not to be able to hear anything. During COVID, we were very, very impressed at how much more we were able to listen to because of how many more less cars there was on the highway.
oh yeah.
And now that they're all back on the road, it's a lot of noise pollution, and hearing the trucks come down with the Jake brakes now is kind of a cringe thing. So having the new vehicles, the new equipment, the new technology that comes with it now is very nice. It's very nice to have a quiet truck, a quiet engine brake, and you could have that thing on and nobody would ever know.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, can you recall any close calls or near crashes or even crashes that you have been in, or a time that you saw something that was maybe a little bit too close for comfort?
I consider myself fortunate and blessed, Jason. I have not been in an accident in my 10 years of CDL experience.
Well, knock on wood.
Um,
I'm doing that now.
yes, knock on wood, yes. However, being the safety director, we see our own incidents or even incidents out on the road where, there's either close calls or we have been in certain crashes. And believe you me, even watching our own people on video on dash cam, it can be cringe. It can be cringeworthy to where you're like, oh my God, it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, or it gives you goosebumps because, we're not watching YouTube videos of, hey, look at all these close calls. It's somebody's life. It's other people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a dash cam in both of my cars. I would not drive without one. I heard an episode where you guys were actually talking about your dash cams. When did you start putting them in the trucks, and what was there a spark that made you all want to put those dash cams in the truck, and do they face the driver and outside, or do you have them all around the truck, or how do they work?
Yeah, they're both outside, inside facing cams. And I believe we started that back in 2018, 2019, I believe. And I believe that was just a push in basically in the realm of safety. It was just a safety deal, and it was going to make us better, especially with the dash cams we use. They have an artificial intelligence coaching system on it, and they catch things. You're following too close. It reminds you, please increase following distance. If you just happen to if you so happen to just grab your phone for some odd reason, it will tell you, put your phone down, and it's an onboard coaching system that has made us a lot better. It's funny you say you have dash cams in your car. I never used to have dash cams. In fact, I was kind of against them. It was kind of the whole Big Brother thing, and I was like, I don't want nobody watching me or whatever, But after seeing what they do and how they exonerate not only our drivers or even other people out on the road, sometimes we're witness to things. They're priceless. They're a great tool to have, and I think a lot more people should have them. Not just truck drivers, but even our own people in the four-wheelers, as far as having our own dash cams, personal dash cams.
You talked about how it can alert a driver if it sees you picking up a phone, but does that then go somewhere? Does it just alert you? Or let's say a driver just knows that it's going to be yelling at me, but that's okay. Just let it yell at me all at once. Is there anybody reviewing that video? Will somebody be noticed or notified if so? There's some accountability if a driver is continually using their phone all the time.
Yes, of course. So that would get sent to their coaches. Me personally being one of those coaches for our company, we have at least another 3 that would receive, video alerts and video clips of certain situations. And that's all basically a la carte, depending on what the company wants sent to them, or what that coach wants sent to them. But it's pretty general as far as what we select. We want to know the harsh brake alert events, the following too close, cell phone use, especially. That's probably number one. We want to make sure everybody is focused on the road and what they're doing and not on their mobile device. But yes, there's accountability. There's video events, and all those type of alerts get sent to their video coach or their Samsara coach, which is the company we use. And there is follow-up. There's coaching. We let them see their videos. We talk about it, why it is that we do or don't do things a certain way. And we go from there, hoping that the driver does learn from that and from their mistake and become a better driver, be a better person.
I heard on your show one time, you guys talking about a bracelet that says safety has no blind spots. What does that bracelet mean to you?
Safety has no blind spots. Yes, it's a safety campaign that came about just a little over a year ago, possibly even going on 2 years now. So the bracelet itself is not only to spread awareness of our blind spots, and our blind spots is what we're not looking at. You can literally take it to where you're not looking in your mirrors, or you're not looking out your windows to, make sure there's not a car on your right side when you're merging, or your left or your rear, whatever the case may be. It's basically to bring awareness that safety is paramount. And, one of the lines that we have in our campaign contract that we have our drivers sign is, drive on the road as if your family is driving next to you. Somebody's family is out there. When we're driving on the road, that could be your friend, your family, or it could be somebody's family of somebody. But eventually, if we all drive in a way where we are protecting human life and we don't want to put anybody at risk, we would be much better drivers for it. Somebody's family or even your own will make it home and be able to say, good night to you and be able to receive you at the end of a long work day.
My guest is JR Saenz. He's the safety director at JFW Trucking in Commerce City, Colorado, also host of the Channel 23 podcast. What are some of the other favorite topics to talk about on your podcast? Sometimes when I was back at KOA Radio and doing the afternoon show, the old Sports Zoo, we some of the best shows, we would plan something, and then somebody right at the beginning of the show would mention something, and it would be totally off topic what we were going to talk about, but it was some of the best shows. So are there some other favorite topics that you guys like to talk about on the podcast?
I think the main focus is always going to be safety on that podcast. And we like to, bring in our families into that podcast, especially for our company, and mention shout outs and bring them into our culture as well. We've been lucky enough to have family members, spouses of drivers that will, tune into our podcast and even listen and made them better drivers, even though they're not behind a big truck. There is some things that get brought up as far as what could affect our careers in this industry as truck drivers, whether that be political stances or not so much stances, but, political, bills that might be getting passed that may affect us, or, the energy type laws that come into effect that may affect us and things like that. So it's always worth talking about those things because they do have an effect on our lives as truck drivers.
Well, sure. There's a lot of regulations with oil and gas and how it might affect the fuel cost. There's a lot of regulations when it comes to where, when, how you can drive. I've seen, I've received emails from people that say, why can't just the truckers only use the right lane? Why are they allowed to use any lane? Why can't they just drive at night, not during the daytime? Keep them out of rush hour. All of these things that I keep hearing all the time.
I think truck drivers have the same sentiment sometimes because we're trying to get a job done and we're like, why can't people be off the roads? There's so many restrictions that come up, or even, once in a while there might be some good things for us, but ultimately lately it almost feels like there's a lot of restrictions or laws or bills that are trying to get passed that basically do kind of strangle us, and it's unfortunate, especially for a company like ours here at JFW that we try to always be on the cutting edge of technology, whether that be new equipment, new trucks, new type of lower emission engines, things like that. Trying to be better for the not only our community but our country, our world. We care just as much as anybody else about pollution and things like that, but we also need to be reasonable about it. There's just some restrictions that they're just a lot.
Yeah, there always is a lot, and everybody wants a piece. Where do you guys go from here? Where do you personally go from here? Are you going to keep driving? Is this going to be your lifelong career? Are you going to start your own trucking company? And where does the podcast go from here?
Personally, myself, I feel like JFW is home. I think I speak for a lot of us there at JFW, whether they're in the office or in the shop or even as drivers. We have found a home at JFW. I personally have. I feel like this is a place where I want to make a difference with our drivers, whether that be through training, coaching, and making them perfect their craft as drivers, being safer drivers out there for all of us. Little by little, hopefully we see better and better drivers out there. And like we tell a lot of them, if JFW is just a stepping stone for you and you're going to go buy your own truck or you're going to go work for a different company, we hope that what we teach you here in the name of safety, that you take that to wherever you're going and you keep that with you for lifelong, whenever that may end as far as your career does. And as for the podcast, I don't know. I think the podcast continues to evolve as anything else, and we'll just continue preaching safety. That's number one for sure.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, JR. I wish you and all the folks and all the drivers at JFW all the best and continued safety on the roads.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you again for having me.
What struck me was there's a lot of similarities between long-haul drivers and some of the short-haul drivers, some of the local drivers, but there are a lot of differences as well, especially when it comes to, just like everybody who does regular commuting, you have to deal with all of the things that happen, stoplights and stop signs and people cutting in front of you and not letting you merge and all these things. When you're just driving across the country, you don't have that many exits to deal with unless you get into the big cities. And typically, the truckers will stay in the one lane to the left unless there's only two lanes. If there's more than two lanes, they'll stay in one of the middle lanes when they're in a on a highway in a city, and that's to allow the merging to happen in that right lane as they just continue to keep on going, because they don't have to slow down and start up. There's a lot of energy that is wasted when you are stopping or starting or making a truck go. And so they want to keep it going at a pretty steady rate. So they try to get into one of the middle lanes if they can, even though a lot of people, if they're in the left lane, then I hear about it. And some drivers say, why can't they just always stay out of the left lane? And maybe they should just be relegated to only driving at night or not during rush hours. Get them out of my way is what they say. But anyway, it was a really interesting conversation. And JR invited me to be on his podcast here in a couple of weeks. So once I do that, I'll share that with you, and that should be interesting to be on their podcast. And I don't know what they're. I'm not an expert. Well, I guess I'm kind of an expert on things, but I like listening to other people be an expert rather than me be an expert on whatever. Anyway, that should be interesting. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Luber, the traffic guy. Be safe, and as always, happy motoring.